The crack of Rear Admiral Vincent Holloway's skull hitting marble floor should have terrified her. But Lieutenant Maya Reeves felt nothing except cold satisfaction, watching 2 stars lose their shine in 8 seconds flat. Master Chief Daniels burst through the door, weapon drawn, finding his unconscious admiral and a 28-year-old female officer who looked like she'd been waiting her entire career for this exact moment. "Ma'am, step away from the admiral." Maya raised her hands slowly, voice steady as surgical steel. "Self-defense, Master Chief. He struck me first. Then he threatened to kill me. Everything's recorded. NCIS is listening. And that bastard finally learned that rank doesn't mean immunity when you assault the wrong woman." Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from today, and if stories about justice against corrupt power resonate with you, subscribe now, because what unfolds next will show you exactly why some fights demand everything you've got, no matter the cost. Comment your city so we can see how far truth travels when someone refuses to stay silent. Maya had known this morning would end with violence. She just hadn't known whose blood would be spilled. 18 hours earlier, she'd sat across from retired Captain Sonia Blackwell in a coffee shop 3 miles off base, the kind of place where Navy personnel went when they didn't want to be seen by anyone wearing a uniform. Sonia was 62 years old, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too many good officers destroyed by men who believed stars on their collar meant immunity from consequences. "He's going to hurt you, Maya," Sonia said, her voice low and urgent. "Vincent Holloway doesn't just harass women. He hunts them, systematically, patiently. And when he's done, their careers are over, while his keeps climbing." Maya wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, feeling the heat through the ceramic. "How many?" 14 that I know of. Women who transferred out of his command over the past 8 years. 7 filed formal complaints that somehow disappeared before they reached anyone who gave a damn. 3 settled with non-disclosure agreements that came with enough money to make silence seem reasonable. 1 tried to kill herself. The words landed like artillery in Maya's chest. She'd suspected Holloway was predatory. You didn't spend 3 years in naval intelligence without learning to read patterns. But hearing the scope of his hunting ground confirmed made something cold and sharp settle into her bones. "NCIS approached me 2 weeks ago," Maya said quietly. "Special Agent Marcus Trent. He showed me files on all 14 women, asked if I'd wear a wire to a meeting with Holloway, document his pattern, give them evidence that can't be buried." Sonia's expression shifted from concern to something harder. "They're using you as bait." "I volunteered." "Why?" Maya thought about Commander Natalie Cross, whose file she'd memorized, 36 years old when she reported Holloway 9 years ago. Career officer on the fast track to admiral. She'd walked into his office to discuss her next assignment, and walked out 30 minutes later knowing her Navy career was over. Now she worked as a civilian contractor in Kuwait, exiled from the institution she'd dedicated her life to serving. "Because someone has to stop him," Maya said. "Because the system protects him better than it protects us. Because I have training that most of his victims didn't have." Sonia leaned forward. "What kind of training?" Maya met her eyes. "The kind that doesn't appear in my official service record. Syria, 2019. Embedded with SEAL Team 6 as a combat medic and intelligence liaison. 14 months of operational deployments that officially never happened. I can handle myself." "Can you handle killing your career? Because that's what happens to women who fight back against flag officers, even when they're right." "My career doesn't mean anything if I have to watch another woman get destroyed because I stayed silent." Sonia studied her for a long moment, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small device that looked like an ordinary fitness tracker. "This is military-grade recording equipment, voice activated, encrypted transmission protocols. Everything Holloway says will be captured and sent in real time to NCIS servers. But Maya, listen to me carefully. The recording proves what he says. It doesn't prove what he does. If he assaults you, if things go physical, the audio won't show who threw the first punch. I know. Do you? Because Vincent Holloway is 68 years old and built like a linebacker who never stopped training. He's got 80 pounds on you and hands big enough to crush your windpipe before you can scream. If he decides the recording is worth killing you to suppress, can you actually stop him? Maya thought about the basement in Damascus, where a Syrian intelligence officer had made similar calculations about her size and gender and isolation. He'd been wrong. She'd walked out of that basement with bruised ribs and his blood under her fingernails, and he'd spent 3 weeks in a military hospital learning that underestimating people was a mistake you only made once. I can stop him, she said. Sonia slid the device across the table. Then stop him. For Natalie. For the other 13. For every woman who comes after you and won't have to face him because you were brave enough to finish what we couldn't. Maya spent the rest of that day preparing the way she'd been trained to prepare for operations in hostile territory. Mental rehearsal of every possible scenario. Physical conditioning to ensure her body would respond faster than her fear. Psychological fortification against the particular kind of violence that men like Holloway inflicted. Not just physical assault, but the systematic destruction of everything you believed about justice and institutions, and whether the uniform you wore meant anything beyond decoration. She went to the base gym at 0530 hours when it was nearly empty. The heavy bag swayed under combinations that would have seemed excessive for an intelligence officer whose primary weapon was supposed to be analytical thinking. Left jab to establish rhythm, right cross targeting the solar plexus, lead hook to the floating ribs where bone met cartilage and breathing became optional. A young petty officer doing pull-ups in the corner watched her with obvious confusion. Female officers didn't usually train like they were preparing for close-quarters combat. Maya ignored his stares. Let him wonder. In 6 hours, people would have much bigger questions about who she really was. She showered methodically, washing away sweat while her mind reviewed the timeline. Holloway's email had arrived 3 days ago. Bland, bureaucratic language that could have meant anything to anyone without context. Lieutenant Reeves, report to conference room Zulu 3, 0900 hours, Friday. Intelligence consultation required regarding overseas operational security assessments. Bring all relevant classified materials. The location choice was deliberate. Zulu 3 was designed for compartmented briefings requiring absolute privacy. Soundproofing that could defeat directional microphones, electromagnetic shielding that made external surveillance impossible. The kind of room where conversations about national security took precedence over every other consideration, including, apparently, the safety of the officers who held those conversations. Holloway had hunted there before. Conference room Zulu 3 appeared in 4 of the victim's statements Maya had read. Locked door, disabled surveillance camera, no witnesses. His preferred killing ground. At 0800 hours, Maya stood in her quarters adjusting her dress uniform with mathematical precision. Every ribbon positioned exactly according to regulations. Every crease sharp enough to draw blood. Everything perfect, because perfect was what operations like this required. Her phone buzzed. Marcus Trent, calling from a number that would generate no records. Lieutenant Reeves, this is your last chance to back out. Say the word and we'll find another approach, another timeline, another officer who... I'm going, Agent Trent. You understand the risks. If Holloway realizes you're recording, if he panics, if he decides killing you is worth the risk. I spent 14 months in Syria documenting war crimes while ISIS was beheading journalists. I think I can handle one aging admiral whose biggest physical challenge lately has been the walk from his parking space to his office. Trent's laugh sounded like gravel shifting. You're either the bravest officer I've met, or the craziest. Maybe both. Just remember, we'll be monitoring the audio in real time. If you use the phrase, "I need to reschedule this meeting," we'll have federal agents breaching that door in 90 seconds. Don't be a hero, Lieutenant. Get the evidence and get out alive. What about justice for the 14 women before me? We're going to get that justice, but it doesn't mean anything if you're dead. Maya ended the call and slipped the recording device onto her wrist. The tiny LED pulsed green once, confirming activation. From this moment forward, every word would be documented with the kind of precision that made lying impossible and truth unavoidable. She spoke quietly to the empty room. This is Lieutenant Maya Reeves. Time is 08:14 hours. I am proceeding to Conference Room Zulu 3 for a meeting with Rear Admiral Vincent Holloway. This operation is authorized under NCIS Special Investigation Protocol 7. All subsequent audio will be recorded and transmitted in real time. If I do not check in within 90 minutes, response protocols should be activated immediately. The walk across base took 12 minutes. Maya used every second to center herself, cycling through the mental preparation she'd learned from a Navy psychologist who specialized in preparing intelligence officers for interrogation and torture. Pain was information. Fear was a tool. Control was a choice you made repeatedly until your nervous system believed it. Pacific Fleet Command rose from the San Diego coastline like a monument to military power, concrete and steel, and enough surveillance equipment to track every person within 5 miles. The kind of facility where classified operations were planned behind encrypted doors and careers were forged or shattered with the stroke of an administrative pen. Maya walked through security checkpoints with the bored efficiency of someone who'd made this trip enough times that novelty had been replaced by routine. Retinal scan, biometric hand geometry, CAC card authentication. Every step logged in databases that would preserve her movements long after everyone involved had retired or died. The elevator to the 7th floor required 2 different security cards. She rode up alone, watching floor numbers illuminate in sequence while her mind reviewed tactical considerations. Zulu 3 had one entrance, no windows. Furniture bolted to the floor except the chairs. If Holloway blocked the door, her escape options narrowed to either going through him or convincing him to move. She'd been through him before. Damascus, the Syrian intelligence officer, blood under her fingernails. She could do it again if necessary. The 7th floor corridor was empty at 08:47 hours. Maya noted the absence of foot traffic with professional attention. Privacy in a facility like Pacific Fleet Command required advanced planning and administrative authority that reached beyond standard protocols. Holloway had wanted to ensure their meeting would be uninterrupted, undocumented, unwitnessed. He'd succeeded beyond his intentions. She paused outside Zulu 3, taking 3 deep breaths while reviewing parameters one final time. The recording device would capture everything. NCIS monitors would be tracking audio in real time. If the situation deteriorated beyond her ability to manage, federal agents were positioned to breach within 90 seconds of her distress signal. But the entire operation depended on Holloway escalating according to his established pattern. That meant she needed to walk into this room knowing she might have to experience assault before she could respond. Knowing that justice sometimes required bleeding before you earned the right to make the guilty party understand what bleeding felt like. Maya knocked twice, sharp, professional, then entered when Holloway's voice called permission through the heavy door. Conference Room Zulu 3 lived up to its reputation. Mahogany paneling that absorbed sound like a tomb, recessed lighting designed to eliminate shadows, a conference table that could seat 12 but currently held only one occupant, whose 2 stars gleamed under carefully positioned lights. Rear Admiral Vincent Holloway stood as she entered, gesturing toward the chair across from him with the practiced courtesy of someone who'd spent 35 years learning to project authority and trustworthiness in equal measure. "Lieutenant Reeves, thank you for being punctual. Please, have a seat." Maya sat, crossing her ankles in the way female officers learned when men in power felt entitled to evaluate their legs along with their service records. She watched Holloway move to the door, turning the lock with a deliberate click that echoed off the mahogany walls. "Security protocols," he said, returning to his seat. "The intelligence we're discussing is compartmented above top secret. Can't risk interruptions." "Of course, sir." He opened a folder, spreading papers across the table between them. Satellite imagery from the Strait of Hormuz, Iranian naval deployments, American carrier strike group positioning. All legitimate intelligence materials that required careful analysis and strategic assessment. "I've been reviewing your threat assessment from last month," Holloway began, his voice carrying the measured authority of someone who'd briefed presidents and 4-star generals. "Your analysis of Iranian mine-laying capabilities in the Strait. I have some concerns about your conclusions. Sir, I'm happy to discuss my methodology and sourcing." "Your methodology?" Holloway smiled, and something predatory flickered behind his eyes. "You concluded that Iranian Revolutionary Guard naval forces lack the technical capability to effectively mine the shipping lanes during a crisis scenario. That strikes me as optimistic, perhaps even naive." Maya kept her voice professional, clinical. "Sir, my assessment was based on signals intelligence showing their mine inventory is primarily Cold War-era Soviet technology that requires specific environmental conditions to function reliably. The Strait's depth, current patterns, and thermal layers make effective mine deployment highly problematic without..." "Lieutenant, are you telling me you know better than a flag officer with 35 years of experience?" The shift in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. They'd crossed from professional discussion into something else. Maya touched her wrist casually, feeling the device pulse once to confirm it was recording every word. "Sir, I'm not questioning your experience. I'm explaining the intelligence analysis that led to my conclusions. If you have different information that contradicts my assessment, I'm certainly willing to review it." Holloway stood, walking slowly around the conference table with deliberate steps. "Different information. That's diplomatic. Let me be more direct, Lieutenant. Your problem isn't lack of information. Your problem is lack of perspective. You're what, 28 years old? 3 years in naval intelligence? You've got tactical knowledge, I'll grant you that. But you don't understand strategy. You don't understand how decisions get made at levels above your comprehension." He was behind her now, close enough that she could feel the displacement of air when he moved. Every instinct screamed at her to stand, to establish distance, to prepare for what she knew was coming. But standing meant disrupting the pattern. Running meant Holloway could claim she'd overreacted to innocent behavior. So she sat perfectly still and let him hunt. "Sir, I understand that my analysis may differ from your assessment. If you'd like me to revisit my conclusions with additional..." His hand found her shoulder, fingers pressing down with weight that was neither accidental nor justified by any professional context. The touch lasted exactly 5 seconds, long enough for the recording device to capture, long enough for Maya's nervous system to register the possessiveness behind it. "Lieutenant Reeves," Holloway said, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. "Let me explain something about how careers work at this level. Your advancement, your assignment opportunities, your entire future in this organization, all of that depends on officers like me writing favorable fitness reports and recommending you for positions that actually matter. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Maya stood slowly, forcing Holloway to step back slightly. Her voice remained level, professional. "Sir, I understand that fitness reports are important. I also understand that they're supposed to be based on professional performance rather than personal relationships." Holloway's jaw tightened. Personal relationships? Interesting choice of words. Are you suggesting something inappropriate, Lieutenant? "I'm suggesting that your hand on my shoulder exceeded professional boundaries, sir." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Maya watched Holloway's expression cycle through calculation, anger, and something darker. She'd challenged him, refused to play the role he'd assigned her. In his mind, that made her either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. "Lieutenant, I think you're misunderstanding the nature of this conversation." Holloway's voice hardened, losing the veneer of collegial discussion. "I invited you here to discuss your professional judgment, which frankly concerns me. You're argumentative, you're disrespectful to senior officers. You seem to think your 3 years of experience makes you qualified to contradict flag officers who've forgotten more about naval strategy than you'll ever learn." "Sir, with respect, I'm simply defending my analysis with factual—" The slap came before she finished speaking. His open palm struck her left cheek with enough force to snap her head sideways. The sound echoed off the mahogany walls like a gunshot. Maya felt the sting spread across her face, felt her training analyzing the biomechanics of the strike, felt something colder than anger settling into her nervous system like ice crystallizing in winter water. She turned back to face him slowly, deliberately, and smiled. "That's going to look terrible on the recording, Admiral." The confusion on Holloway's face would have been comical if the situation weren't so deadly serious. His eyes darted around the room, looking for cameras he knew were disabled, looking for any explanation for why his perfectly planned assault was suddenly collapsing into something he didn't control. "What recording? There's no recording equipment in this room. I personally verified." Maya touched the device on her wrist. "Voice-activated military-grade recording equipment, sir. Encrypted transmission protocols. Real-time data upload to secure NCIS servers monitored by federal investigators with authorization to document criminal activity by senior military officers. Every word you've spoken since I entered this room has been captured with timestamp precision, including the part where you struck a subordinate officer." The color drained from Holloway's face. "That's illegal. Recording without consent violates—" "NCIS authorization includes exemption from consent requirements when documenting suspected criminal activity by military personnel. The recording is not only admissible, Admiral, it's legally protected evidence that can't be suppressed, regardless of what procedural challenges your attorneys might want to mount." Maya watched him process the implications. His careful isolation hadn't protected him. His disabled surveillance hadn't ensured privacy. His 2 stars hadn't made him untouchable. He'd walked into a trap that looked exactly like his own hunting ground, because the bait had been designed by people who understood predators better than he understood himself. "You set me up." His voice was flat, hollow. "This whole thing was planned." "I came here knowing exactly what you would do, Admiral, because men like you are remarkably predictable. Your behavioral pattern has been studied and documented by NCIS for 3 years. Every action you've taken today follows a script we've seen 14 times before. Different women, same locked room, same threats, same violence." Holloway's hands clenched into fists. "Nobody will believe that recording represents the full context. My 35 years of unblemished service against the word of a junior officer who clearly engineered this situation." "Unblemished?" Maya's voice carried an edge now. "Is that what you call it when 14 women request transfers from your command? When 7 formal complaints mysteriously disappear before reaching investigators? When 3 victims settle with NDAs that come with your signature on the payment authorization? You don't know what you're talking about. Commander Natalie Cross, age 36 when you assaulted her in this exact room 9 years ago. You told her career advancement required flexibility. When she refused, you destroyed her fitness reports and ensured she'd never be promoted. She's working as a civilian contractor in Kuwait now. Exiled from the Navy, she dedicated her life to serving. Holloway's breathing came faster. Natalie was unstable. She made accusations she couldn't prove. Lieutenant Jessica Wong, age 29. You cornered her in this room 6 years ago. When she threatened to report, you said no one would believe her word against a flag officer's. She filed a complaint anyway. It disappeared within 48 hours. She resigned her commission 3 months later. I don't have to listen to this. Captain Rachel Morrison, age 41. You assaulted her 7 years ago when she was a lieutenant commander. She settled with an NDA for $75,000 that came from a discretionary fund you controlled. The payment authorization has your signature. NCIS has the financial records. Maya watched him realize the scope of the investigation. They hadn't just been documenting him. They'd been building a pattern case that showed systematic predation across years and multiple victims. Evidence that even the most expensive attorneys couldn't explain away as coincidence or misunderstanding. This is a conspiracy, Holloway said, grasping for any explanation that preserved his innocence. You coordinated with bitter former officers who resented my demanding leadership style. We coordinated with victims you thought you'd silenced, but silence isn't the same as forgiveness, Admiral. And eventually, predators encounter someone who refuses to be prey. Holloway moved toward the door, calculating whether he could leave before this situation spiraled further beyond his control. But Maya was already there, positioned between him and his escape route. I can't let you leave yet, sir. NCIS agents are en route. You're going to be placed under arrest for assault on a commissioned officer, sexual harassment, abuse of authority, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. I'd advise you to remain calm and cooperate fully. Get out of my way, Lieutenant. That's a direct order. No, sir. His hand shot out, grabbing for her arm with the clear intention of moving her by force. Maya sidestepped, using his momentum against him, guiding his hand past her body while stepping inside his reach. Her palm strike to his solar plexus wasn't hard enough to cause serious injury, just enough to force air from his lungs and create the split second of disorientation she needed. Don't make this worse than it already is, Admiral. But Holloway was beyond rational calculation now. Panic and rage had overridden whatever tactical thinking remained. He threw a wild haymaker, the kind of punch that telegraphed its intentions so clearly that Maya had already begun her counter before his fist started moving. She intercepted his wrist mid-swing, her fingers finding the precise pressure points that controlled nerve clusters responsible for motor function. Not a desperate block. Calculated interception that demonstrated she'd been tracking his movement from the moment his shoulders betrayed his intention. Her right hand drove upward in a palm strike to his chin, angled precisely to transfer maximum kinetic energy to his brain stem. The impact created shockwaves through his nervous system that disrupted electrical signals between brain and body. His legs buckled, his vision blurred. Maya maintained control of his captured arm, using his own weight to guide his descent in directions that prevented him from striking furniture or injuring himself beyond the damage she'd calculated as necessary. Her movements flowed with practiced efficiency. Muscle memory from operations that officially never happened in places that didn't exist on any map. Holloway hit the marble floor with a dull thud. Maya followed him down, her knee finding the pressure point behind his left ear with mathematical precision. She applied exactly enough pressure to compress the carotid artery without causing permanent damage. Blood choke, applied with clinical efficiency. He struggled briefly, his hands clawing at her leg with diminishing coordination, as oxygen deprivation took effect. She maintained pressure for exactly 4 seconds after he stopped moving, ensuring complete unconsciousness while avoiding the brain damage that prolonged compression could cause. When she released the hold, his breathing was steady, his pulse strong but slow, his body positioned in recovery posture that would prevent aspiration if he vomited during the transition back to consciousness. The entire sequence had required less than 8 seconds. Maya stood, adjusting her uniform with automatic precision. She checked Holloway's vitals one more time, breathing regular, color good, pulse suggesting he'd wake naturally within 5 to 10 minutes, with nothing worse than a headache and a destroyed career. She moved to the door and unlocked it, knowing that Master Chief Daniels would have heard the impact of a 200-pound body hitting marble flooring, despite the room's soundproofing. Knowing that armed guards were already on their way. Her breathing remained controlled. Her heart rate was elevated but manageable. Her mental state focused on tactical considerations that would determine whether this situation concluded with Holloway in custody or her in a morgue. The door burst open 30 seconds later. Master Chief Barrett Daniels entered with his sidearm drawn, his SEAL training evident in the way he cleared corners and assessed threats before focusing on the unconscious admiral. Behind him, Petty Officer Chen followed, with weapon raised, taking a position that allowed him to cover both Maya and Holloway without putting Daniels in his line of fire.
"Ma'am, step away from the Admiral and identify yourself," Daniels commanded, his voice carrying the authority of 24 years protecting high-value personnel in environments ranging from Pentagon briefings to forward operating bases where the enemy wore uniforms that looked exactly like his own. Maya raised her hands slowly, palms visible.
"Master Chief Daniels, I'm Lieutenant Maya Reeves, Naval Intelligence. Admiral Holloway assaulted me. I defended myself, using appropriate non-lethal force. He's unconscious but stable. He should regain consciousness within the next 3 to 5 minutes, with no permanent neurological damage. Everything that occurred in this room has been recorded and transmitted to NCIS in real time. Federal agents are en route." The clinical precision of her assessment struck Daniels as fundamentally wrong for someone who should have been experiencing shock or fear or any of the normal human responses to violence. She sounded like a doctor providing a medical evaluation rather than a potential suspect describing an assault on a flag officer. "Ma'am, did you render Admiral Holloway unconscious?" "Yes, Master Chief. In self-defense after Admiral Holloway committed battery and attempted to prevent me from leaving this room. The complete audio documentation will be submitted as evidence." Daniels felt the situation shifting in directions his training hadn't prepared him to navigate. Protecting flag officers from threats was straightforward, but scenarios where the flag officer was the aggressor, where the victim had successfully defended herself, where evidence might prove the powerful were actually the guilty, these circumstances required protocols that fell outside his expertise. "Petty Officer Chen, contact base security. Request immediate NCIS response, medical evaluation team, and JAG legal counsel. Tell them we have a flag officer incident requiring investigation by personnel with appropriate security clearances." Chen moved to the secure phone mounted on the wall, speaking in clipped professional tones that would trigger response protocols throughout the entire command structure. Within minutes, this room would be flooded with investigators, lawyers, medical personnel, and senior officers whose careers would be defined by how they handled what came next. Behind them, Admiral Holloway groaned softly as consciousness began its reluctant return. His eyes opened to confusion, disorientation, pain radiating from his jaw where Maya's palm strike had connected. Recognition dawned in stages. Waking on a floor when his last clear memory was standing, the presence of his own bodyguards with weapons drawn, the female officer he'd been certain he controlled waiting with the patience of someone who'd already won. Holloway tried to sit up, his movements uncoordinated.
Daniels moved to assist, professional courtesy overriding his personal assessment of what had actually happened in this room. "Admiral, stay down. Medical personnel are en route. You've been unconscious for approximately 4 minutes." "What happened?" Holloway's voice came out rough, his throat still processing the effects of compression. "Sir, Lieutenant Reeves states that you assaulted her and she defended herself. NCIS has been notified and will be conducting a full investigation." The words penetrated Holloway's consciousness like artillery. His eyes found Maya, and the rage that flooded his expression suggested unconsciousness hadn't taught him anything about the fundamental change in their respective positions. "That's impossible. She attacked me. I want her arrested immediately for assault on a flag officer." "Sir," Daniels said carefully, "I'm advising you to remain silent until legal counsel arrives. Anything you say from this point is being documented." "I don't need legal counsel. I'm the victim here. She came into this room with recording equipment, deliberately provoked me, and then physically assaulted me when I responded to her insubordination." Maya spoke for the first time since Holloway had regained consciousness, her voice carrying that same clinical precision that suggested she was documenting facts rather than defending herself. "Admiral, the recording captures you striking me first. It captures your threat that no recording matters if I'm not alive to authenticate it. It captures you attempting to physically prevent me from leaving this room. And it captures you throwing the first punch that I defended against. Your version of events contradicts evidence that's already been transmitted to federal investigators." The door opened again, admitting Special Agent Marcus Trent with the weary authority of someone who'd spent 20 years investigating military misconduct and thought he'd seen every variation until reality proved him wrong. Trent was 48 years old, with gray at the temples and permanent squint lines from too many years reading reports under fluorescent lighting. He swept the room with eyes that catalogued everything: Daniel's defensive posture, Chen's position near the door, Holloway's disheveled uniform, and the way Maya stood with her hands visible and an expression that said she'd been waiting for him specifically. "Master Chief Daniels, Petty Officer Chen, I'm Special Agent Trent, NCIS. I understand we have a situation involving Admiral Holloway and Lieutenant Reeves that requires immediate investigation." "Yes, sir. Lieutenant Reeves states that Admiral Holloway assaulted her and she defended herself. She also claims the entire incident was recorded under NCIS authorization." Trent's eyes shifted to Maya. "Lieutenant Reeves, I'm going to need you to come with me for a formal statement. Medical personnel will examine you for injuries. Everything from this point will be documented according to standard criminal investigation protocols." "Understood, Agent Trent. I have the recording device that captured the complete audio of Admiral Holloway's assault. I'm prepared to provide full testimony and all relevant evidence." "This is absurd!" Holloway interjected, his voice gaining strength as consciousness fully returned. "I demand that Lieutenant Reeves be placed in custody immediately. She assaulted me with premeditation. She came to this meeting armed with recording equipment, obvious evidence of planning to entrap a senior officer." Trent's voice cut through the bluster. "Admiral Holloway, I'm advising you that anything you say may be used as evidence in criminal proceedings. You have the right to legal counsel. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly recommend you exercise both of those rights until your attorney arrives." The expression on Holloway's face suggested he was struggling to process that a federal investigator was treating him like a criminal rather than a victim. That his authority to give orders and expect obedience had evaporated in the 8 seconds it took Maya to teach him that predators eventually encounter prey who refuse to be victims. And in that moment, standing in Conference Room Zulu 3 with an unconscious admiral's career bleeding out on marble flooring, Maya Reeves understood that justice wasn't a destination. It was a fight she'd chosen, and she'd keep choosing it, for as long as predators believed their rank made them untouchable. The real battle was just beginning. The NCIS field office at Pacific Fleet Command occupied a secure wing that most personnel avoided, like radiation exposure. Maya followed Agent Trent through corridors designed to be forgettable, her mind already cataloging the interrogation techniques he'd likely employ, and the defenses she'd need to maintain. They entered an interview room containing a metal table bolted to the floor and chairs engineered for maximum discomfort. A woman waited inside. Mid-40s, dark hair pulled back with severe efficiency. Suit that suggested either recent promotion or compulsive organization. Lieutenant Reeves, this is Special Agent Kimberly Chen. She'll be conducting your formal interview while I coordinate the broader investigation. Agent Chen gestured to the chair across from her. Lieutenant, this interview is being recorded. Everything you tell us will be documented and may be used as evidence. You have the right to legal counsel before answering any questions. Do you understand these rights? Yes, ma'am. I decline counsel at this time. I'm prepared to provide a complete statement about Admiral Holloway's assault. Chen's eyebrow lifted fractionally. Most officers who'd just put a flag officer on the floor would be demanding lawyers and negotiating plea agreements. Maya's directness suggested either extreme confidence or catastrophic naivety. All right. Let's start with when you first received orders to meet with Admiral Holloway. For the next 3 hours, Maya walked them through every detail. The encrypted email summoning her to Zulu 3, the conversation with Captain Sonia Blackwell, the recording device authorized under NCIS protocols, Holloway's escalating harassment, his hand on her shoulder, the slap, his threat that no recording mattered if she was dead. Agent Chen stopped her. He specifically said that? No recording matters if you're dead? Yes, ma'am. At approximately 0914 hours. The exact quote was, "No recording matters if you're not alive to authenticate it." Guards don't respond for another 8 minutes. A lot can happen in 8 minutes. Trent leaned forward. Lieutenant, that's a direct threat of murder. You understand what that means for this case? It means Admiral Holloway believed he could kill me and claim I attacked him first. It means he's done this calculation before. Isolated room, disabled surveillance, his word against a corpse. Chen and Trent exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Maya had just articulated exactly what their 3-year investigation had been trying to prove. Holloway wasn't just a harasser. He was a predator who'd calculated the precise conditions under which murder would be his safest option. Trent pulled out a tablet, swiping through files. Lieutenant, you should know you're not the first person to report Admiral Holloway's behavior. NCIS has been investigating him for 37 months. How many victims came forward? 4 filed formal complaints. 19 more reported through unofficial channels or requested transfers without explaining why. All following the same pattern you just described. Isolated locations, disabled surveillance, threats of career destruction if they reported. Maya felt ice settle into her stomach. 23 women. 23 times Holloway had hunted in that room, and the system had protected him every single time. Why wasn't he stopped? Chen's expression hardened. Because every complaint either disappeared or was handled through informal counseling that resulted in the victim being transferred while Holloway remained in position. We needed evidence that couldn't be buried. We needed someone willing to document his pattern, knowing they might have to defend themselves physically. You needed bait. We needed an officer with the training to survive him, Trent corrected. Your classified service record shows a 14-month deployment to Syria in 2019. Combat medic and intelligence liaison embedded with SEAL Team 6. Hand-to-hand combat certification. Advanced tactical training. You were the only officer we could approach who had both the operational background and the psychological resilience to handle what Holloway would do. Maya understood now why NCIS had chosen her. They didn't need a victim. They needed a weapon disguised as prey. "How many others did you approach before me?" Trent hesitated, then decided honesty served their purposes better than evasion. 3. 2 declined outright. 1 agreed initially but backed out when she realized what defending herself might cost her career. "And if I'd backed out?" "We'd still be looking for someone brave enough or crazy enough to walk into that room. Lieutenant, what you did today, documenting his assault, defending yourself, staying calm enough to preserve evidence, that changed everything. But you need to understand what happens next." Chen pulled up a photograph on her tablet. A woman in her late 30s wearing navy khakis, eyes that suggested she'd stopped trusting institutions years ago. "This is Commander Natalie Cross. She was the first victim to file a formal complaint 9 years ago. Holloway assaulted her in Zulu 3, told her career advancement required special cooperation. When she refused, he destroyed her fitness reports. Her complaint reached his commanding officer, Vice Admiral Robert Kensington, who decided the Navy's reputation mattered more than one commander's allegations." "Where is she now?" "Civilian contractor in Kuwait. Her Navy career ended at 36 because she believed reporting would result in justice instead of exile." Maya stared at the photograph, memorizing features that belonged to someone who'd paid the full price for challenging power without the evidence to make it stick. "Does she know about today?" "She's the one who suggested we recruit you," Trent said quietly. "She's been helping NCIS identify victims and document patterns for 18 months. When we told her we needed an officer with combat training willing to walk into Holloway's trap, she reviewed personnel files and found your name. She said, Maya Reeves survived 14 months in Syria. She can survive 8 minutes with Holloway." The weight of that recommendation settled on Maya's shoulders like body armor. Natalie Cross had been destroyed by the system, yet she'd spent 18 months working to ensure other women wouldn't face the same fate. That kind of courage didn't come from institutional loyalty. It came from knowing that silence protected predators, while action might save lives. "I want to meet her." "You will. She's flying in tomorrow to testify at Holloway's preliminary hearing. But, Lieutenant, you need to understand the fight you just started. Holloway has powerful allies. Vice Admiral Kensington covered for him 9 years ago, and he's not going to let this prosecution expose his complicity. Within 24 hours, you'll be facing character assassination from officers whose careers depend on Holloway's guilt remaining hidden." As if summoned by prophecy, Trent's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression darkened. Admiral Holloway's attorney just arrived. Elliot Grayson, former JAG officer, now charges $950 per hour to defend officers who can afford the best legal protection money buys. He's already filing motions to suppress your recording and demanding your immediate arrest. Maya had expected this. Predators like Holloway didn't operate without insurance policies. "Let him file whatever he wants. The recording is authenticated. The evidence is clear." "Evidence doesn't matter if the system decides protecting a flag officer's reputation is more important than prosecuting his crimes," Chen said. "Grayson's already working the media angle. By tonight, conservative news outlets will be running stories about a decorated war hero destroyed by false accusations from a vindictive junior officer." Trent stood, pacing with the restless energy of someone who'd watched too many cases collapse under political pressure. "We've got 43 minutes of audio. We've got your testimony. We've got medical evidence of assault. But Grayson will argue entrapment. He'll claim you deliberately provoked Holloway to create a confrontation you could document. He'll attack your classified service record, suggest you're a trained operative who seduced and trapped a superior officer." "My service record proves I have the training to defend myself. It doesn't prove I provoked the assault." "No,
but it gives Grayson ammunition to convince a court-martial panel that you engineered this entire situation. And if he can create reasonable doubt about your intentions, Holloway walks free while you face charges for assault on a flag officer. Maya felt the familiar calculations settling into her mind. The same tactical assessments she'd performed 100 times in Syria when operations went sideways and survival required adapting faster than the enemy could react. Then we need to move before Grayson has time to build his defense. Get the other victims on record. Establish the pattern so overwhelming that even he can't explain it away as coincidence. And, most importantly, find out who else in the command structure knew about Holloway's behavior and chose to protect him. Agent Chen smiled for the first time since the interview began. Lieutenant, that's exactly the plan. Welcome to the team. What none of them knew yet was that Admiral Holloway's protection network extended far higher than anyone suspected. That a decorated 4-star admiral with connections reaching back 3 decades was already mobilizing resources to destroy Maya's credibility before the recording could destroy his legacy. That the fight for accountability was about to become significantly more dangerous than prosecuting one sexual predator. In a hospital room 3 floors below, Admiral Holloway sat upright on an examination table while a Navy corpsman checked his pupils and jaw for fractures. His attorney stood beside him, tablet in hand, already constructing the narrative that would determine whether Holloway spent his retirement in federal prison or on cable news discussing naval strategy. Vincent, I need you to tell me exactly what happened in that room, Elliot Grayson said, his voice carrying the practiced sympathy of someone who'd heard confessions from murderers and found ways to make juries believe they were victims. She trapped me. Came in with recording equipment hidden on her wrist, deliberately contradicted my intelligence assessments. When I tried to correct her insubordination, she attacked me. Used some kind of martial arts technique that suggests professional combat training, far beyond what a normal intelligence officer would have. Grayson nodded, typing notes. Her service record shows a deployment gap in 2019, 14 months unaccounted for. That gives us leverage to suggest she's not what she appears to be. Can you suppress the recording? I can challenge its admissibility, argue that NCIS authorization doesn't exempt them from consent requirements, create procedural complications that might convince a military judge to exclude it. But Vincent, you need to understand something. Even if we suppress the recording, we've got a credibility problem. She's 28, decorated, no history of disciplinary issues. You're 68, with 14 women who mysteriously transferred out of your command. The optics aren't favorable. Holloway's hands clenched into fists. Those transfers have nothing to do with misconduct. I run a demanding command. Some officers couldn't handle the pressure. 14 in 8 years? That's going to be difficult to explain as coincidence. Then make them look like conspirators. Bitter officers who coordinated false accusations because they resented my standards. Grayson studied his client with the clinical assessment of someone evaluating whether victory was possible or whether negotiating a plea agreement was the smarter play. I can try. But if NCIS has documentation from multiple victims following the same pattern, if they have financial records showing settlements or payoffs, if they have testimony from officers who witnessed your behavior, Vincent, we might be looking at conviction on multiple counts: sexual assault, battery, abuse of authority, attempted murder based on that threat the recording allegedly captured. Allegedly? You don't believe me? I believe you're my client, and I'll defend you to the best of my ability. But I need to know if there's anything else NCIS might have, anything you haven't told me, because surprises in court destroy defenses faster than bad evidence. Holloway met his attorney's eyes and made a calculation. Trust him with the truth, or maintain the fiction that might preserve some shred of his reputation if everything collapsed.
He chose fiction. There's nothing else. Reeves trapped me. I defended myself. She attacked me. That's the truth. Grayson nodded slowly, recognizing the lie but accepting it as the story they'd take to trial. Then that's what we'll prove. But Vincent, you should prepare yourself for the possibility that even if we win in court, your career is over. The Navy doesn't keep flag officers who've been accused of sexual assault, regardless of the verdict. Best case scenario, you retire with benefits intact and avoid prison.
Worst case, I'm not going to prison. I've given 35 years to this institution. I've earned the benefit of the doubt. In another part of the base, Vice Admiral Robert Kensington sat in his office reading preliminary reports about the incident in Zulu 3, with the sick recognition that his own career was about to become collateral damage in a scandal he'd tried to bury 9 years ago. He'd known about Holloway's predatory behavior since 2015, when Commander Natalie Cross had filed her complaint. He'd known it was credible, because Cross was exactly the kind of officer whose word should have been trusted. But Kensington had made a calculation that protecting the Navy's reputation mattered more than protecting one commander. Now that calculation was about to destroy everything he'd built. His phone rang. Private number. He answered. "Robert, it's Vincent. We need to talk about damage control." Kensington closed his eyes, knowing what was coming. "Vincent, I can't be involved in your defense. The optics alone would. I'm not asking for your involvement. I'm reminding you that if I go down, I'm taking everyone who knew about my situation and chose to protect me. That includes you, Robert. It includes the 3 complaints you buried. It includes the financial settlements you authorized from discretionary funds. It includes every decision you made to preserve institutional reputation over individual justice." The threat was clear. Holloway would turn state's evidence if it meant reducing his sentence. He'd expose the entire protection network if that's what survival required. "What do you want?" "I want you to use your connections to make this investigation disappear. Pressure NCIS to drop the case. Convince the Secretary of the Navy that prosecuting me damages military readiness. Whatever it takes to ensure I walk away from this with my retirement intact. Vincent, NCIS has recording evidence. They have multiple victims. I can't make that disappear. You made Natalie Cross disappear. You can do it again." Kensington felt the trap closing around him. If he refused to help, Holloway would expose him. If he tried to interfere with the investigation, NCIS would add obstruction of justice to the charges he'd eventually face. Either way, his career was over. But maybe he could buy time. Maybe he could find leverage that would allow him to survive this scandal by proving his cooperation mattered more than his complicity. "I'll see what I can do," he lied. "But Vincent, you need to understand that the political climate has changed. The Navy can't protect officers accused of sexual assault the way we could 9 years ago. The pressure to prosecute is too strong." "Then make the victim recant. Threaten her career. Make her understand that fighting me will destroy everything she's worked for." Kensington hung up without responding. He sat in his office overlooking San Diego Harbor and calculated how much of his legacy he could salvage if he turned on Holloway before Holloway turned on him. The answer was not much. But cooperation might mean the difference between forced retirement and federal prison. He picked up his phone and dialed NCIS. "Special Agent Trent, this is Vice Admiral Robert Kensington. I need to schedule an interview regarding Admiral Holloway's conduct. I have information that may be relevant to your investigation." Trent's voice carried cautious satisfaction. "Admiral, I appreciate your cooperation. How soon can you come in?" "Tomorrow morning. And Agent Trent, I'll need immunity agreements drafted before I provide my statement. What I know about Holloway's protection network goes beyond what you've uncovered so far." "How far beyond?"
Far enough that you'll want to expand your investigation to include 12 senior officers who knew about his pattern and actively worked to suppress complaints. Far enough that this stops being about one predator and becomes about systemic, institutional corruption. The silence on Trent's end lasted 5 seconds. When he spoke again, his voice carried the barely contained excitement of someone who'd been hunting a conspiracy for years and just received the break that would crack it wide open. Admiral Kensington, I'll have immunity agreements ready by 0800 tomorrow. Don't discuss this conversation with anyone. Don't warn anyone that you're cooperating. And, Admiral, thank you for choosing accountability over protecting people who don't deserve protection. Kensington ended the call and stared at his desk, where photographs of his career achievements mocked him with their promise of legacy and honor. He'd spent 38 years earning those achievements. He'd destroyed them in the 9 years since he'd chosen to protect Vincent Holloway instead of Natalie Cross. Now he'd spend whatever remained of his career trying to earn back something that looked enough like integrity that his grandchildren wouldn't be ashamed to speak his name. Back in the NCIS interview room, Agent Trent shared Kensington's offer with Maya and Agent Chen. Vice Admiral Kensington just volunteered to testify against Holloway. He's claiming knowledge of a protection network involving 12 senior officers. If he's telling the truth, this investigation just expanded from prosecuting one predator to exposing systematic institutional corruption. Maya processed this information with the tactical assessment she'd learned in Syria. Kensington's cooperation was either genuine remorse or calculated self-preservation. Either way, it gave them leverage to pressure other officers into similar cooperation. Do you believe him? I believe he's terrified, Trent said, which makes him useful whether or not his remorse is genuine. Lieutenant, you should understand what's about to happen. Within 48 hours, your name will be all over media as the officer who brought down a decorated admiral. Some people will call you a hero. Others will call you a traitor who destroyed a good man's career with false accusations. Your life is about to become extraordinarily difficult. I didn't do this for recognition. I did it so the next woman who reports won't be destroyed for telling the truth. Agent Chen stood, extending her hand. Lieutenant Reeves, you're officially assigned to the NCIS investigation team as a material witness and consultant. You'll work with us to identify other victims, document patterns, and prepare testimony for court-martial. This is going to take months. It's going to be brutal. But if we do this right, we change the system that's protected predators like Holloway for decades. Maya shook her hand, feeling the weight of that mission settle onto shoulders that had carried heavier burdens in worse places. When do we start? We already did. Tomorrow, you meet Commander Natalie Cross. She's been waiting 9 years to see Holloway face accountability. Don't let her down. Maya walked out of NCIS headquarters as the sun set over San Diego Harbor, turning the Pacific into molten gold that promised endings and beginnings in equal measure. Her phone buzzed with a message from a number she didn't recognize. Lieutenant Reeves, this is Natalie Cross. Agent Trent gave me your contact. Thank you for finishing what I couldn't start. Tomorrow we make sure Holloway never hurts another woman. See you at 0900. Maya typed a response. Commander Cross, the honor is mine. Justice delayed isn't justice denied. It's justice preparing for people brave enough to demand it. She hit send and kept walking, knowing that the fight ahead would test everything she believed about institutions and honor, and whether the uniform she wore meant something more than decoration. The recording device on her wrist pulsed once, reminding her that evidence mattered more than rank. That truth outlasted power. That 8 seconds in a locked room had started a chain reaction that would either reform the system or prove it was beyond saving. Either way, Maya Reeves wasn't backing down. Commander Natalie Cross walked into the NCIS conference room at 0857 hours with the posture of someone who'd spent 9 years carrying weight that didn't belong to her. She was 39 now, hair touched with gray that hadn't been there in the photographs Maya had studied. Her eyes held the particular exhaustion that came from fighting institutional power and losing everything except the determination to try again. Maya stood as she entered, extending her hand.
Commander Cross, I'm Lieutenant Maya Reeves.
Natalie took her hand, grip firm enough to communicate strength without performative aggression.
I know who you are, Lieutenant. You're the woman who did what I couldn't. Thank you. You filed the first complaint. You documented his pattern when no one was listening. I just finished what you started.
Agent Trent entered behind Natalie, carrying files that represented 3 years of investigation, compressed into evidence thick enough to bury careers. He spread them across the conference table with the reverence of someone handling explosives. Commander Cross, Lieutenant Reeves, what we're about to discuss doesn't leave this room without my authorization. We've got testimony from 19 victims spanning 9 years. We've got financial records proving Vice Admiral Kensington authorized payments to silence 3 women who threatened formal complaints. And, as of 2 hours ago, we have Kensington's cooperation.
Natalie's expression flickered with something between vindication and rage. Robert Kensington is cooperating? The man who buried my complaint and told me pursuing it would destroy my career is now helping you prosecute Holloway?
He's helping himself avoid prison, Trent corrected. But his testimony gives us leverage to pressure 11 other senior officers into similar cooperation. The protection network that enabled Holloway is collapsing. We just need to apply pressure in the right sequence.
Maya leaned forward, studying the files. What do you need from us?
I need you both to testify at Holloway's preliminary hearing tomorrow. Commander Cross, your testimony establishes the 9-year pattern. Lieutenant Reeves, yours proves he's still actively predatory. Together, you make it impossible for the military judge to dismiss this as isolated misconduct or misunderstanding. Natalie pulled one of the files toward her, opening it to reveal her own statement from 2015.
Reading her younger self's words seemed to physically hurt. Maya watched her jaw tighten as she absorbed the naive hope that reporting would result in justice instead of exile. I told them everything, Natalie said quietly. Every detail of what Holloway did in Zulu 3. How he locked the door and disabled the camera. How he said my next assignment depended on my willingness to be flexible about professional boundaries. How his hand moved from my shoulder to my throat when I tried to leave. I documented it all and believed the system would protect me. What happened when you filed the complaint? Vice Admiral Kensington called me to his office, told me Admiral Holloway was a valuable officer whose career mattered to the Navy's strategic interests, said my allegations were serious but lacked corroborating evidence, suggested I might have misinterpreted innocent professional contact as something inappropriate.
Then he gave me 2 options: withdraw my complaint and accept transfer to a staff position in Kuwait, or proceed with formal charges and watch my career burn while Holloway's continued thriving. Maya felt her hands curl into fists under the table. The system hadn't just failed Natalie. It had given her a choice between justice and survival, then punished her for choosing survival.
You took the Kuwait assignment.
I was 30. I had 12 years invested in a career I loved. I believed if I stayed quiet and kept my head down, I'd eventually get another chance to serve in positions that mattered. What I didn't understand was that Kensington had already marked my record. Every fitness report after that complaint included subtle language suggesting I had difficulty adapting to demanding leadership and questioned strategic decisions beyond her level of responsibility. I was being quietly destroyed while Holloway kept hunting. Agent Trent pulled up a document on his tablet.
Commander, you should know that Kensington's cooperation includes admission that he deliberately sabotaged your career to discourage other women from reporting. He's provided documentation of fitness reports he altered and promotion recommendations he blocked.
With his testimony, we can petition to have your record corrected and your career reinstated. Natalie's laugh came out bitter and sharp. 9 years too late. I'm 39 years old, working as a contractor, because the Navy I served decided protecting a predator mattered more than protecting me. Correcting my record doesn't give me back the years I lost, or the career I should have had. No, Maya said quietly. But it proves you were right, that filing the complaint was brave even when the system punished you for it. That what happened to you wasn't your failure, it was theirs. The silence that followed carried weight that statistics and legal documents couldn't capture.
Natalie Cross had lost 9 years to a system that valued reputation over justice. Maya had risked her career to prove that system could change. And in this conference room, with evidence spread across the table like ammunition, they were about to force accountability onto officers who'd spent decades avoiding it. Agent Chen entered carrying a laptop, her expression suggesting news that would complicate already complicated situations. We've got a problem. Elliot Grayson just filed a motion to exclude all victim testimony except Lieutenant Reeves. He's arguing that Commander Cross's complaint from 9 years ago is too remote in time to establish current pattern. The other 17 victims never filed formal complaints, so their testimony is hearsay that prejudices the panel against Admiral Holloway. Trent slammed his hand on the table hard enough to make the files jump. That's garbage legal theory designed to isolate Maya and make this look like a personal vendetta instead of systematic predation. It's smart strategy, Natalie said grimly. If Grayson can exclude our testimony, the case becomes he said, she said between a decorated admiral and a junior officer with classified training that suggests professional capability for violence. He'll argue Maya trapped and assaulted Holloway, and without our testimony to prove pattern, the panel might believe him. Maya stood, pacing with the restless energy of someone calculating tactical responses faster than the room could process. Then we need to make the judge understand that excluding pattern evidence guarantees future victims. That protecting Holloway's due process rights by limiting testimony means sacrificing every woman who face him if he walks free. Military judges don't make decisions based on future hypothetical victims, Chen said. They make decisions based on legal precedent and rules of evidence that favor the accused. Then change the legal argument. Show them financial records proving Kensington paid off 3 victims to prevent formal complaints. Those payments prove consciousness of guilt. Holloway knew his conduct was criminal, or he wouldn't have needed Kensington to buy silence. Once you establish guilt consciousness, all 19 victims become relevant to show the scope of conduct he was trying to hide. Trent studied Maya with renewed appreciation. That's actually brilliant legal reasoning for someone whose specialty is supposed to be intelligence analysis. I minored in military justice at the academy. Figured understanding the legal system might be useful if I ever needed to navigate it. Or weaponize it, Agent Chen added with a smile that suggested professional respect. I'll draft the response motion arguing consciousness of guilt, but we need those financial records authenticated by Kensington before tomorrow's hearing. Trent checked his watch. Kensington's immunity interview starts in 20 minutes. I'll make sure we cover the payments in detail sufficient to survive cross-examination. He left the room with Chen following, leaving Maya and Natalie alone with the files and the shared understanding of what it cost to fight power when power had already decided you were acceptable casualties. Natalie broke the silence first. What Holloway said before he attacked you, about the recording not mattering if you were dead, did you believe he meant it? Maya thought about the calculation she'd seen in his eyes. The cold assessment of risk versus reward. The fundamental belief that his career mattered more than her life. Yes, I think if he'd successfully killed me, he would have claimed I attacked him and he defended himself. Master Chief Daniels would have found me dead
and Holloway injured but alive. Without the recording, it becomes his word against evidence that a junior officer with combat training assaulted a flag officer. He probably walks free, and I become a cautionary tale about officers who snap under pressure. "That's what I would have been," Natalie said quietly. "If Holloway had killed me 9 years ago, Kensington would have buried it as a training accident or mental health crisis. Female officer couldn't handle demanding command environment. Tragic, but not the Navy's fault. My parents would have gotten a flag and a pension, and the truth would have died with me." But it didn't. You survived. You documented his pattern. You spent 18 months helping NCIS build a case that might actually stick. That's not failure, Commander. That's patience most people don't have the strength to maintain. Natalie met her eyes with an intensity that felt like transferring weight from one set of shoulders to another. "Don't let them destroy you the way they destroyed me." When Grayson attacks your credibility, when officers you respect suggest you're exaggerating or seeking attention, when the pressure makes you question whether fighting was worth the cost, remember that 19 women are watching to see if speaking up results in justice or just different kinds of punishment. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore. The weight of that responsibility settled onto Maya like body armor. She'd walked into Zulu 3 thinking she was documenting one predator's assault. She was learning she'd stepped into a battle that would define whether the system could hold senior officers accountable, or whether stars on a collar still meant immunity from consequences. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it to find a message that made her blood run cold. "You ruined a good man's career with lies. Watch your back, bitch. Accidents happen to officers who make enemies." She showed it to Natalie without comment. "That's the third death threat I've received today," Maya said. "NCIS is tracing the numbers, but they're using burner phones purchased with cash. No way to identify who's sending them. Holloway's allies trying to intimidate you into recanting? I got similar messages for 6 months after filing my complaint. They stopped when I accepted the Kuwait assignment and disappeared from the Navy's radar." "I'm not disappearing." "I know. That's why they'll escalate. Death threats, character assassination, maybe physical confrontation if they get desperate enough. Maya, you need to understand that some officers believe protecting the institution's reputation matters more than individual lives. They'll destroy you to preserve the fiction that the Navy doesn't have a sexual assault problem." Before Maya could respond, Trent burst back into the room with an expression that suggested the investigation had just taken another turn into territory that would complicate everyone's lives. Vice Admiral Kensington just provided documentation that Admiral Garrison Whitfield knew about Holloway's conduct as far back as 2013. Whitfield is a 4-star admiral currently serving as commander of Pacific Fleet. He's Holloway's mentor and the officer who recommended him for flag rank. If Kensington's documentation proves Whitfield knew and actively protected Holloway, we're not just prosecuting one predator. We're exposing a protection network that reaches the highest levels of Pacific Fleet Command. Natalie's face went pale. "Garrison Whitfield? The war hero who received the Navy Cross for actions in Desert Storm? He's the officer who mentored Holloway?" According to Kensington, Whitfield received at least 3 complaints about Holloway between 2013 and 2017. He buried all of them, counseled the victims to move on for the good of their careers, and authorized payments from discretionary funds to ensure silence. If we can prove Whitfield's complicity, his entire command structure becomes suspect. Maya processed this information with tactical precision. Prosecuting Holloway was difficult. Prosecuting a 4-star admiral who'd spent 40 years building political connections was nearly impossible. But if they could prove systematic protection of predators at the highest command levels, They might force reforms that prevented future officers from facing what Natalie had endured. What evidence does Kensington have? Email chains discussing personnel issues that need to be handled quietly. Financial authorizations for payments described as retention bonuses that correspond exactly with dates that victims requested transfers. And recordings of phone conversations where Whitfield explicitly tells Kensington to make problems disappear because Holloway is too valuable to lose over exaggerated allegations from officers who can't handle tough leadership.
Whitfield recorded his own conversations? He's paranoid about subordinates misrepresenting his orders, kept audio documentation of every major decision as insurance against future accusations that he gave illegal directives. The insurance just became evidence that proves conspiracy to obstruct justice. Agent Chen returned with documents fresh from the printer. Judge Caldwell denied Grayson's motion to exclude victim testimony. He ruled that pattern evidence is admissible to prove consciousness of guilt and to rebut defense claims that Lieutenant Reeves misinterpreted innocent conduct as assault. All 19 victims can testify. Natalie stood abruptly, hands shaking. I have to testify tomorrow? In front of Holloway? Describe everything he did while he sits there in his uniform pretending to be the victim? You don't have to do anything, Maya said gently. But if you can, if you have the strength, your testimony proves this isn't about one bad encounter. It's about 9 years of predation that senior officers knew about and chose to protect. And if I break down on the stand? If I can't get through my testimony without falling apart? Grayson will use that to argue I'm emotionally unstable, that my complaint 9 years ago came from mental health issues rather than actual assault. Maya moved to stand beside her, close enough that Natalie could draw strength from proximity without feeling crowded. Then you fall apart, and the panel sees what it costs to survive assault and institutional betrayal. Grayson wants you silent or discredited. Refusing to be either is how we win. Trent's phone rang. He answered, listened for 30 seconds, then hung up with an expression that suggested bad news arriving ahead of schedule. That was Jag. Admiral Whitfield just filed a motion to intervene in Holloway's case as a character witness for the defense. He's claiming he has personal knowledge of Holloway's exemplary career and professional conduct that rebuts allegations of systematic predation. He's going to testify that Holloway is innocent? Natalie's voice rose with barely controlled fury. The man who buried my complaint and paid off 3 victims is now defending the predator he protected for 9 years? He's trying to prevent his own prosecution by doubling down on Holloway's innocence. If Holloway is convicted, Whitfield's protection of him becomes criminal conspiracy. His only play is to convince the panel that all 19 victims are lying, and Holloway is actually an honorable officer destroyed by coordinated false accusations. Maya felt strategy crystallizing in her mind with the clarity that came from operational planning under pressure. Let him testify. Once he's under oath, he's vulnerable to cross-examination. We hit him with Kensington's emails, the financial records, the recordings. Prove he knew about Holloway's pattern and actively worked to cover it. His testimony doesn't save Holloway. It proves conspiracy at the highest levels. That's legally brilliant and tactically suicidal, Chen said. If you go after a 4-star admiral on the stand, if you accuse him of criminal conspiracy during live testimony, you're making an enemy who has the power to destroy your career even if he ends up in prison. He already destroyed Commander Cross's career. He's been destroying women's careers for a decade while protecting officers he decided were too valuable to hold accountable. I'm not letting him do it again. Natalie grabbed Maya's arm, squeezing hard enough to hurt. Maya, listen to me. Garrison Whitfield is one of the most powerful officers in the Navy. He has connections to the Secretary of Defense, to senators on the Armed Services Committee, to defense contractors who depend on his goodwill for billion-dollar contracts. If you accuse him of conspiracy in open court, Those people will come after you with resources you can't imagine. Then they come after me, but they do it knowing that silence didn't protect their conspiracy. It just delayed accountability until someone refused to stay silent. Trent studied Maya with an expression caught between admiration and concern. Lieutenant, you understand that what you're proposing means ending your Navy career regardless of how this trial concludes. Even if we convict Holloway and Whitfield, even if we expose the entire protection network, you'll be known as the officer who brought down flag officers. No one will want to command you. No one will trust you. You'll be isolated professionally until the pressure forces you out. Then I'll leave knowing I did something that mattered more than my career. Commander Cross lost 9 years because the system valued protecting powerful men over protecting her. I'm not letting that system claim another victim just because fighting it costs me everything. The room fell silent as everyone processed what Maya had just committed to. She'd walked into Zulu 3 expecting to document one assault. She was walking out, prepared to dismantle a protection network that had enabled predators for decades, knowing it would cost her the career she'd built and the future she'd imagined. Natalie released her arm, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for finishing what I couldn't, for refusing to let them make you disappear the way they made me disappear, for proving that some fights are worth losing everything to win. We're not losing this one, Maya said. We're just getting started. Agent Trent began organizing files for tomorrow's hearing when his phone rang again. He answered, listened, and his expression shifted from focused to shocked. When? How badly injured? He paused, listening. Understood. We're on our way. He ended the call and turned to face them with news that would change the trajectory of everything they'd just planned. Master Chief Daniels was just assaulted in the parking garage. 2 men in civilian clothes attacked him with weapons. He's alive, but in critical condition. Security footage shows the attackers fled in a vehicle registered to a retired Navy SEAL who served under Admiral Whitfield's command in 2008. Maya felt ice flood her nervous system. They're sending a message that testifying against Holloway means facing violence from people willing to kill to protect him. It's more than a message, Natalie said quietly. It's escalation. They tried intimidation with death threats. When that didn't work, they moved to actual violence. Maya, they're not going to stop until either Holloway walks free or you're too injured to testify. Then we move the hearing up. Get testimony on record before they have time to eliminate more witnesses. Trent shook his head. Judge Caldwell won't accelerate the schedule without cause that proves imminent danger to witnesses. And even with Daniels's assault, Grayson will argue that's unrelated to the Holloway case, unless we can prove direct connection between Whitfield and the attackers. The vehicle registration proves connection. Retired SEAL under Whitfield's command attacks the witness who found Holloway unconscious? That's not coincidence. It's conspiracy to intimidate witnesses and obstruct justice. It's circumstantial, without evidence that Whitfield ordered the attack. And getting that evidence means investigating a 4-star admiral while protecting witnesses he's apparently willing to kill to silence. Maya looked at Natalie, seeing her own determination reflected in eyes that had survived 9 years of institutional betrayal and were still willing to fight. Then we protect each other. You don't testify alone. I don't leave the building without security. And we make sure every piece of evidence gets on record before they can destroy it or the people who provided it. Agent Chen pulled up security protocols on her tablet. I'm putting both of you in protective custody starting now. 24-hour security details, restricted access to your locations, electronic surveillance monitoring for threats.
You don't go anywhere without armed federal agents who answer to NCIS, not Pacific Fleet Command. How long can you maintain that level of security? As long as the investigation requires. But Maya, Natalie, you need to understand that accepting protective custody means accepting that your lives are in danger from people who wear the same uniform you do. That the institution you serve includes officers willing to kill to protect their power. Can you live with that knowledge? Maya thought about the Syrian intelligence officer in Damascus, the basement where she'd learned that violence wasn't personal, it was tactical.
A tool used by people who believed power exempted them from accountability. She'd survived that basement. She'd survived this. I can live with it. The question is whether they can live with the consequences of trying. Natalie stood, wiping tears from her face with angry swipes that suggested she was done crying and ready to fight. I've been hiding for 9 years, pretending Kuwait exile was acceptable because at least I was alive. But hiding didn't protect me. It just meant Holloway kept hunting while I kept silent. Tomorrow I testify, and if Whitfield's people come after me, at least I'll go down fighting instead of hiding. Trent coordinated protective details while Maya and Natalie were escorted to secure housing on base, where federal agents would monitor approaches and ensure no one reached them without authorization. As they left NCIS headquarters, Maya's phone buzzed with another message. This one included a photograph of her parents' house in Virginia with a simple caption, "Nice family you have. Would be terrible if something happened to them." She showed it to Agent Chen without speaking. I'll have FBI put your family under protection immediately. Maya, these people are serious. They're not making empty threats. They're promising violence if you don't back down. Then they're going to be disappointed. Because I don't back down from bullies. And I definitely don't back down from officers who think threatening families makes them powerful instead of criminal. Agent Chen studied her with an expression that mixed concern and respect. You really are willing to lose everything for this, aren't you? I'm willing to risk everything to prove that justice matters more than protecting powerful predators. There's a difference between losing and choosing what you fight for. As they drove toward secure housing through San Diego streets lit by sunset that painted everything gold and red, like promises and warnings, Maya understood that tomorrow's hearing would determine more than Admiral Holloway's guilt. It would determine whether the system could evolve to hold senior officers accountable, or whether power would continue protecting predators while punishing the victims brave enough to demand justice. She'd walked into Zulu 3 18 hours ago, believing she was documenting one assault. She was learning she'd triggered an investigation that would either reform the institution or prove it was beyond saving. Either way, there was no going back. The recording existed. The testimony was scheduled. The evidence was secured. And tomorrow, in a military courtroom where careers were forged and destroyed with equal efficiency, Maya Reeves and Natalie Cross would stand together and prove that some battles were worth fighting, even when victory cost everything you'd spent your life building. The war for accountability had just begun. The military courtroom at Naval Station San Diego filled with the kind of tension that preceded verdicts that would end careers and redefine institutional accountability. Maya sat at the prosecution table beside Captain Diana Foster, the Navy's most decorated trial attorney, watching 8 officers file into the panel box with expressions suggesting they understood this trial would test everything they believed about honor and the chain of command. Captain Foster leaned close, her voice barely audible. Remember, Lieutenant, Grayson will try to rattle you on cross-examination. He'll attack your classified service record, suggest you're a trained operative who trapped Holloway. Don't take the bait. Answer his questions with facts, not emotion. Understood, ma'am. Across the aisle, Elliot Grayson arranged files with meticulous precision, while Admiral Holloway sat rigidly in his dress uniform, two stars gleaming under fluorescent lights that made him look exactly like what he was supposed to be, a distinguished officer whose career represented the Navy's highest ideals. The illusion would have been convincing if Maya hadn't heard his voice on that recording threatening to kill her. Military Judge Captain Raymond Tucker entered, and the courtroom rose as one. Tucker was 58 years old, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent 20 years as a SEAL before injuries forced him into legal practice. He'd seen combat in places that didn't exist on maps, and killed people who'd been trying to kill him. The combination made him uniquely qualified to judge cases where violence intersected with military justice.
This court is now in session.
The United States versus Rear Admiral Vincent Holloway. The accused stands charged with sexual assault, battery on a commissioned officer, abuse of authority, attempted murder, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. How does the accused plead? Grayson stood with practiced grace.
Not guilty to all charges, Your Honor. Admiral Holloway maintains his innocence and looks forward to demonstrating that these accusations result from a calculated campaign by a junior officer with specialized training in deception and violence.
Judge Tucker's expression suggested he'd heard similar defenses before and found them no more convincing now. Captain Foster, you may proceed with opening statements. Foster stood, buttoning her uniform jacket with deliberate precision. She walked to the podium positioned between the prosecution table and the panel, making eye contact with each panel member before speaking.
Members of the panel,
over the next 3 days, you will hear evidence proving beyond any reasonable doubt that Rear Admiral Vincent Holloway is a sexual predator who spent 9 years using his authority to prey on female officers under his command. You will hear testimony from Commander Natalie Cross, whose complaint 9 years ago was buried by senior officers who valued the Navy's reputation more than her safety. You will hear from Lieutenant Maya Reeves, who documented Admiral Holloway's assault with recording equipment that captured his explicit threat to murder her if she reported his conduct. And you will hear evidence of a protection network involving multiple flag officers who knew about Holloway's pattern and actively worked to silence his victims. She paused, letting the weight of those accusations settle into minds that would ultimately decide whether Holloway spent his remaining years in federal prison or walked free with his pension intact. The defense will ask you to believe this decorated officer was entrapped by a conspiracy involving NCIS and multiple female officers who coordinated false accusations. But the evidence will show something simpler and darker. Admiral Holloway believed his 2 stars made him untouchable. He believed isolated rooms and disabled surveillance would protect him. He was wrong. Lieutenant Reeves stopped him. And now this panel has the opportunity to demonstrate that the United States Navy means what it says about accountability, regardless of rank. She returned to her seat without theatrics. Grayson's opening statement followed predictable trajectories. He emphasized Holloway's 35 years of distinguished service, questioned Maya's credibility by noting classified gaps in her service record, described the recording as evidence of entrapment rather than assault.
Members of the panel, you will be asked to end Admiral Holloway's career based on a recording obtained through deception and testimony from witnesses who coordinated their stories with NCIS agents. I ask you to remember that in America, we prove guilt. We don't assume it. And reasonable doubt isn't some technical loophole. It's the foundation of justice that protects all of us. Judge Tucker waited until Grayson finished before addressing the panel with instructions that would govern how they evaluated everything that followed. Members of the panel, you will consider only evidence presented during this trial. You will not be influenced by the accused's rank except as it relates directly to the charges. Your verdict must be based on evidence proving guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The first witness called was Commander Natalie Cross.
She walked to the stand wearing her dress uniform with every ribbon positioned according to regulations, but her hands trembled slightly as she raised her right hand to swear the oath. Captain Foster began gently, establishing Natalie's credibility with questions about her 17 years of service, her Bronze Star from Afghanistan, her assignment to Admiral Holloway's staff in 2015. Commander Cross, can you describe your working relationship with Admiral Holloway during the first 6 months of your assignment? Natalie's voice remained steady despite the tremor in her hands. Initially professional, ma'am. Admiral Holloway sought my input on operational planning. He praised my analytical work. I believed I was fortunate to serve under an officer with his experience. When did that relationship change? Approximately 7 months into my assignment. Admiral Holloway began requesting meetings in Conference Room Zulu 3 rather than his office, where staff would normally be present. He started making comments about my appearance that had nothing to do with uniform regulations. He asked personal questions about my relationships that exceeded professional interest. Foster walked Natalie through the escalation with methodical precision. The gradual progression from inappropriate comments to unwanted touching. The moment Holloway cornered her in Zulu 3 and made explicit that her career advancement depended on services that had nothing to do with tactical planning. What happened when Admiral Holloway locked the door? Natalie's voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through. He said my next assignment depended on my willingness to be flexible about professional boundaries. His hand moved from my shoulder to my throat. I tried to leave, and he blocked the door, told me that female officers needed to understand how advancement really worked at senior levels, that my career was in his hands, and I should think carefully about whether I wanted to throw away my future over misplaced prudishness. What did you do? I faked a medical emergency, claimed heart palpitations. He had to call for medical assistance or risk questions about allowing his subordinate to suffer a cardiac event. The corpsman arrived within minutes. I was transported to the base hospital and requested emergency transfer, claiming family crisis. Did you report Admiral Holloway's conduct through official channels? Natalie's expression flickered with something between regret and rage. Yes, ma'am. I filed a formal complaint with Vice Admiral Robert Kensington, who was Admiral Holloway's commanding officer. I documented everything that happened in Zulu 3. I believed the system would protect me. What happened when you filed that complaint? Vice Admiral Kensington told me Admiral Holloway was a valuable officer whose career mattered to Navy strategic interests. He said my allegations lacked corroborating evidence and suggested I might have misinterpreted innocent professional contact. Then he gave me a choice: withdraw my complaint and accept transfer to Kuwait, or proceed with formal charges and watch my career burn. Foster let that admission sit for a moment, allowing the panel to process what it meant that a flag officer had given a victim the choice between justice and survival, then punished her for choosing survival. You took the Kuwait assignment. I was 30 years old, with 12 years invested in a career I loved. I chose survival over accountability. What I didn't know was that Vice Admiral Kensington had already marked my record. Every fitness report after that complaint included language suggesting I had difficulty adapting to demanding leadership. I was being quietly destroyed while Admiral Holloway kept hunting other women. Grayson's cross-examination attempted to paint Natalie as someone with a personal vendetta against Holloway, someone who'd coordinated false accusations with bitter officers who resented his demanding standards. But Natalie had spent 18 months preparing for these attacks, and every question gave her opportunity to reinforce the pattern. Commander Cross, isn't it true you requested transfer because you couldn't handle Admiral Holloway's demanding leadership style? No, sir. I requested transfer because Admiral Holloway sexually assaulted me, and Vice Admiral Kensington made clear that reporting would destroy my career,
while Holloway's continued thriving. You filed one complaint 9 years ago that was investigated and determined to lack merit. Now you're testifying against Admiral Holloway because NCIS recruited you to their conspiracy.
I'm testifying because 19 women experienced the same pattern of predation I experienced. And this panel deserves to know that Admiral Holloway's conduct wasn't isolated misconduct. It was systematic hunting, enabled by senior officers who valued protecting him over protecting us. Grayson tried several more angles, but Natalie held firm. When she finally stepped down, Maya saw tears streaming down her face mixed with something that looked like vindication. She'd survived testimony that required reliving trauma in front of the man who'd assaulted her and the system that had punished her for reporting. The second day brought testimony from 3 other victims, each describing eerily similar encounters in Zulu 3. Same locked door, same disabled camera, same threats about career advancement, same institutional response that resulted in their transfers while Holloway remained protected. But the testimony that would ultimately break Grayson's defense came on the afternoon of the second day, when Vice Admiral Robert Kensington took the stand as a prosecution witness, with immunity from prosecution in exchange for cooperation. Captain Foster established his credentials quickly: 38 years of service, 3 stars, current assignment as Deputy Commander of Pacific Fleet. Then she went for the throat. Admiral Kensington, how many complaints did you receive regarding Admiral Holloway's conduct toward female officers? Kensington's voice was flat, emotionless. 7 formal complaints between 2015 and 2022. Approximately 15 informal reports from officers who expressed concern but didn't want to file formal charges. What did you do with those complaints? I buried them, counseled the complainants that pursuing formal charges would damage their careers, authorized payments from discretionary funds to 3 officers who threatened to go outside the chain of command, ensured Admiral Holloway's fitness reports contained no mention of the allegations. The courtroom went absolutely silent. A 3-star admiral had just admitted to systematic obstruction of justice spanning 7 years. Why did you protect Admiral Holloway? Because Admiral Garrison Whitfield, who was my commanding officer at the time, told me explicitly that Holloway was too valuable to lose over what he called exaggerated allegations from officers who couldn't handle tough leadership. Admiral Whitfield made clear that my own career advancement depended on ensuring Holloway's career continued without interruption. Foster produced emails, financial records, recordings of phone conversations where Whitfield explicitly ordered Kensington to make problems disappear. Each piece of evidence built the case that Holloway's predation wasn't just known at senior levels. It was actively protected by officers who believed institutional reputation mattered more than individual justice. Grayson's cross-examination attempted damage control, but Kensington's testimony had already destroyed whatever remained of the defense strategy. When he stepped down, Maya saw several panel members exchange glances that suggested their verdict was already decided. The third day brought the testimony everyone had been waiting for. Maya walked to the stand at 900 hours wearing her dress uniform with every ribbon earned through service in places that officially didn't exist. She swore the oath and met Holloway's eyes directly, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing fear or uncertainty. Captain Foster began with background questions designed to establish Maya's credibility and counter inevitable attacks on her classified service record. Lieutenant Reeves, can you describe your assignment to Pacific Fleet Command? I was assigned to the Intelligence Division in March of last year. My primary duties involved analysis of overseas threat assessments and coordination with Joint Special Operations Command on counterterrorism operations. When did you first have contact with NCIS regarding Admiral Holloway? Special Agent Marcus Trent approached me 6 weeks before the incident in Zulu 3.
He explained that NCIS had been investigating Admiral Holloway's pattern of sexual assault for 3 years. He asked if I would be willing to document Holloway's conduct using recording equipment authorized under NCIS investigative protocols.
Why did you agree? Maya paused, choosing words carefully. Because Commander Natalie Cross and 18 other women had reported Admiral Holloway's predatory behavior, and the system had failed them.
Because NCIS needed evidence that couldn't be buried by senior officers who valued protecting Holloway over protecting his victims. And because I had training that gave me the capability to defend myself if the situation escalated to violence. Foster walked Maya through the morning of the assault with the same methodical precision she'd applied to every previous witness. The email summoning her to Zulu 3, the recording device, the conversation that shifted from professional to predatory, Holloway's hand on her shoulder, the slap, his threat that no recording mattered if she was dead. What happened when Admiral Holloway threatened to kill you? I informed him that his conduct was being recorded and transmitted to NCIS in real time. I requested that he maintain professional distance and cease his assault. He responded by attempting to strike me with a closed fist. I defended myself using non-lethal restraint techniques I learned during JSOC training.
Can you describe those techniques? I intercepted his arm mid-swing, applied a palm strike to his jaw, and rendered him unconscious through carotid artery compression. Total time from his initial attack to loss of consciousness was approximately 8 seconds. Foster produced the recording device from evidence, entering it formally into the trial record before playing the complete 43 minutes of audio that captured every threat Holloway had made and every warning Maya had provided before defending herself physically. The panel listened in absolute silence as Holloway's voice filled the courtroom. His threats about career destruction. His statement that female officers needed to understand their place. His casual mention that other women had learned these lessons before. And finally, the threat that sealed his fate. No recording matters if you're not alive to authenticate it. Guards don't respond for another 8 minutes. A lot can happen in 8 minutes.
When the recording finished, Foster let the silence stretch before asking her final question.
Lieutenant Reeves, do you believe Admiral Holloway intended to kill you in that room?
Yes, ma'am. I believe if he'd successfully killed me, he would have claimed I attacked him and he defended himself. Without the recording, it becomes his word against evidence that I assaulted a flag officer. He probably walks free, and I become a cautionary tale about officers who snap under pressure.
Grayson's cross-examination attempted to portray Maya as a trained operative who'd engineered the entire situation, but every question he asked gave Maya opportunity to reinforce that Holloway had made choices that led to his assault and her necessary defense. Lieutenant Reeves, you went into that room with recording equipment and NCIS authorization, knowing exactly what would happen. You deliberately provoked Admiral Holloway by questioning his tactical judgment. You wanted him to attack you so you could claim self-defense. Maya's voice remained level, professional. Sir, I entered that room prepared to defend myself because NCIS had documented that Admiral Holloway was a sexual predator who'd assaulted 19 women over 9 years. I recorded our conversation because I knew he would assault me, and I needed evidence that would survive legal challenges. And I defended myself when he attempted to kill me because I wasn't willing to die quietly so the Navy could avoid the embarrassment of prosecuting a flag officer for attempted murder. You used your specialized combat training to assault a superior officer who was simply trying to correct your insubordination. I used my training to survive an attempted murder by a predator who believed his rank exempted him from accountability. The recording proves who attacked whom, sir. My training just determined who survived. Grayson tried several more angles, but Maya held firm on every point. When she finally stepped down after 90 minutes of testimony, she saw several panel members nodding slightly.
the universal signal that a witness had been credible and convincing. But the trial's most explosive moment came on the afternoon of the third day, when Admiral Garrison Whitfield took the stand as a character witness for Holloway. The four-star admiral walked to the witness box wearing enough medals to armor a tank, his Navy Cross gleaming prominently among ribbons that represented 40 years of distinguished service. Grayson's direct examination followed predictable paths. Whitfield praised Holloway as one of the finest officers he'd mentored, questioned whether NCIS had properly investigated alternative explanations for the pattern of female transfers, suggested that young officers today were too quick to interpret demanding leadership as harassment.
Captain Foster let him talk, let him establish credibility and defense of Holloway with enough rope that what came next would be inescapable. Admiral Whitfield, you mentioned you mentored Admiral Holloway throughout his career. When did that mentorship begin? When he was a lieutenant commander serving on my staff in 2003. I recognized his potential immediately. And during that time, did you ever receive complaints about Lieutenant Commander Holloway's conduct toward female personnel? Whitfield hesitated, recognizing the trap but unable to see how to avoid it. I may have heard concerns that were handled through appropriate counseling. Foster produced documents from NCIS archives, complaints filed in 2013 by 3 different female officers describing harassment and assault. Complaints routed to Whitfield as the senior officer responsible for addressing misconduct. Admiral Whitfield, do these complaints refresh your memory about specific concerns regarding Admiral Holloway? I handled those matters appropriately through counseling and administrative action. Is that why all 3 officers requested transfers within weeks of filing complaints? Is that why none were promoted on schedule? Is that why their careers effectively ended while Lieutenant Commander Holloway received your enthusiastic endorsement for assignments that led to his flag rank? Foster produced financial records showing payments from accounts Whitfield controlled to attorneys representing women who'd accused officers under his command. She produced email chains where Whitfield explicitly told Kensington to make problems disappear because Holloway was too valuable to lose. She produced recordings, Whitfield's own paranoid documentation of conversations where he ordered subordinates to bury complaints and silence victims. The evidence was overwhelming. Garrison Whitfield hadn't just failed to stop one predator. He'd protected multiple predators over decades, building a network that ensured complaints disappeared and careers ended for anyone who challenged officers he decided were valuable. Judge Tucker stopped the testimony and advised Whitfield to seek immediate legal counsel. The 4-star admiral left the courtroom under guard, his Navy Cross suddenly looking less like honor and more like camouflage for systematic corruption. The panel deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman, a female O-6 helicopter pilot with 23 years of service, stood with an expression suggesting the deliberations hadn't been comfortable, but had ultimately reached consensus. On the charge of sexual assault, how do you find? Guilty, Your Honor. On the charge of battery on a commissioned officer? Guilty. On the charge of abuse of authority? Guilty. On the charge of attempted murder? Guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to obstruct justice? Guilty. 5 guilty verdicts delivered in tomes that suggested the panel understood they were ending not just Holloway's career, but sending a message that accountability applied regardless of stars on a collar. The sentencing phase followed immediately. The panel recommended 22 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, dishonorable discharge, and forfeiture of all military benefits, including the pension Holloway had spent 35 years earning. Judge Tucker concurred without modification. Rear Admiral Vincent Holloway, your actions have betrayed every oath you've taken and every principle this uniform represents. You used authority to prey on those you were sworn to protect. You threatened murder to silence a victim who refused to submit. You corrupted institutions designed to ensure accountability. This court sentences you to 22 years imprisonment. You will be dishonorably discharged, with forfeiture of all rank, honors, and benefits. You are remanded to custody immediately." Holloway collapsed as military police moved to take him into custody, not from physical injury, but from the sudden weight of understanding that the authority he'd wielded for 3 decades had evaporated in the time it took a panel forewoman to pronounce 5 guilty verdicts. Maya watched them lead him away in handcuffs, feeling something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but approached justice. Natalie Cross sat beside her, tears streaming down her face.
"Thank you," Natalie whispered, "for finishing what I couldn't. For proving the system can change when someone refuses to accept that power means immunity." "We did it together," Maya said. "You documented his pattern when no one was listening. I just had the training to survive long enough to make them hear."
Agent Trent approached with news that would determine what happened next.
"Lieutenant Reeves, Commander Cross, Admiral Whitfield has just been placed under arrest. He's being charged with 47 counts of conspiracy to obstruct justice, each representing a complaint he buried or a victim he pressured into silence. His trial is scheduled for 6 months from now, but legal analysts predict he'll accept a plea agreement rather than face public exposure."
"What about the other 11 officers Kensington identified?" 12 are under investigation. Some will accept plea agreements, others will demand trials. All of them will learn what Holloway and Whitfield learned, that accountability eventually comes for everyone, regardless of rank or connections. Maya stood, adjusting her uniform with automatic precision. She'd walked into Zulu 3 believing she was documenting one assault. She'd triggered an investigation that was dismantling a protection network that had enabled predators for decades. The fight for accountability wasn't over. But today, in this courtroom, justice had won a battle that would make every future battle slightly easier to fight. And somewhere in 19 different locations, women who'd been silent for years were finding the courage to speak, knowing that this time, finally, the system might actually listen. 6 months after Admiral Holloway's conviction, Maya stood in the NCIS conference room that had become her second home, studying photographs of 8 senior officers whose careers were about to end because they'd chosen to protect predators instead of victims. Agent Trent spread the files across the table with the satisfied efficiency of someone who'd spent 3 years building cases that would finally deliver accountability. 4 admirals, 2 captains, 2 commanders, he said. All of them knew about Holloway's pattern. All of them actively worked to suppress complaints. And thanks to Vice Admiral Kensington's cooperation, we have documentation proving their complicity in writing that even the most expensive defense attorneys can't explain away. Maya picked up the file on Rear Admiral Thomas Brennan, who'd served as Holloway's commanding officer in 2018, when Lieutenant Jessica Wong had filed her complaint. Brennan had personally authorized the payment that silenced Wong and ensured her resignation 3 months later.
"When do the arrests begin?"
"Tomorrow morning. Simultaneous raids at 0600 hours across 4 naval installations. We're coordinating with FBI and military police to ensure nobody has time to destroy evidence or flee. By noon tomorrow, 8 senior officers will be in federal custody, facing charges that will put most of them in prison for the next decade." Commander Natalie Cross entered, carrying coffee and the particular exhaustion that came from spending 6 months testifying at multiple trials, while simultaneously rebuilding a career that had been destroyed 9 years ago. The Navy had promoted her to captain as restitution for the years Kensington had sabotaged her advancement. But promotions couldn't erase the damage or return the time she'd lost.
"Admiral Whitfield just accepted a plea agreement," she announced. 15 years in federal prison in exchange for testimony against the other 11 officers. His attorney released a statement saying he takes full responsibility for his actions and hopes his cooperation helps reform the system he corrupted.
Maya felt cold satisfaction settle into her chest.
Garrison Whitfield had spent 40 years building a reputation as a war hero and respected leader. That reputation was now permanently defined by his systematic protection of sexual predators and his willingness to destroy victims who demanded accountability.
15 years. He'll be 83 when he's released.
If he survives that long, Trent added. Federal prison isn't kind to former military officers, especially ones convicted of crimes that involved betraying the people they were sworn to protect. Whitfield's Navy Cross won't impress inmates who hate authority and love punishing officers who abused their power. Agent Chen joined them, tablet in hand, displaying real-time updates from the investigation that had expanded far beyond anyone's initial projections.
We've received 47 new complaints in the past 6 months. Officers who stayed silent for years are finally reporting because they watched Holloway's trial and realized the system might actually hold predators accountable now.
We're opening investigations into 23 additional senior officers across 3 service branches. Maya absorbed this information with tactical precision. Holloway's conviction hadn't just ended one predator's career. It had triggered a cascade of accountability that was forcing the military to confront systematic failures that had enabled abuse for decades.
How many of those complaints have merit?
All of them. We've corroborated evidence in 39 cases so far. The remaining 8 are still under investigation, but preliminary findings suggest they'll also result in prosecutions. Maya, what you started in Zulu 3 is changing the entire military justice system. Victims who would have stayed silent forever are finding courage because you proved that fighting back doesn't always end in career destruction. Before Maya could respond, her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She answered cautiously, aware that death threats had continued sporadically over the past 6 months from officers and family members who believed Holloway had been unfairly targeted.
Lieutenant Reeves, this is Captain Sarah Mitchell. I served under Admiral Holloway in 2016. I never filed a formal complaint because I watched what happened to Commander Cross and knew reporting would destroy me. But I'm ready to testify now if you need additional evidence for the other cases you're building.
Maya felt emotion tighten her throat.
Captain Mitchell, we have your name in our files. NCIS documented your transfer request and the pattern that suggested Holloway was the reason you left his command. Your testimony would help prosecute officers who protected him. Are you certain you're ready for what that involves? I've been hiding for 8 years, Lieutenant.
Watching you take down Holloway and Whitfield taught me that hiding doesn't protect us. It just means predators keep hunting while we keep silent. I'm done hiding. Tell me what you need, and I'll provide it.
Maya coordinated details with Captain Mitchell, while Natalie watched with an expression that suggested she was reliving her own decision to finally speak after years of silence. When Maya ended the call, Natalie spoke quietly. That's the 4th call you've received this week. Women who stayed silent are finding their voices because you proved the system can change. Maya, you're giving victims hope that reporting will result in justice instead of retaliation. That's worth more than any medal the Navy could give you. I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because the alternative was watching the system keep destroying women who had the courage to demand accountability. Trent's phone rang. He listened for 30 seconds, his expression shifting from focused to troubled.
When he hung up, his voice carried the weight of news that would complicate everyone's lives. Master Chief Daniels just died from complications related to the assault 6 months ago. The 2 men who attacked him have been arrested and are cooperating with prosecutors. They've testified that Admiral Whitfield personally ordered the assault to intimidate witnesses. Whitfield's plea agreement just became worthless. He's now facing additional charges of conspiracy to commit murder. The silence that followed carried the particular heaviness that came from understanding that violence had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate moment. Barrett Daniels had survived 24 years protecting high-value personnel in combat zones around the world. He'd died in a parking garage, because he'd had the integrity to testify against a flag officer who'd assaulted a junior officer. Maya stood, hands clenched into fists. Whitfield ordered the hit that killed Daniels? He was already cooperating with prosecutors. Why would he risk additional charges? Because Daniels was scheduled to testify in 3 of the other cases. His testimony about finding you standing over Holloway's unconscious body proved that your account was accurate. Without Daniels, those prosecutions become harder to win. Whitfield was trying to protect his subordinates by eliminating the witness who could corroborate multiple victims' accounts. How do we prove Whitfield ordered the hit? Chen pulled up files on her tablet. The 2 attackers kept detailed records of their communications with Whitfield, text messages using burner phones, financial transactions showing payments from accounts Whitfield controlled, audio recordings of phone calls where he explicitly ordered them to eliminate the security chief before he can testify against my people. The evidence is overwhelming. Natalie's voice cut through with barely controlled fury. So Whitfield's 15-year plea agreement evaporates, and he faces life in prison for conspiracy to commit murder. Good. Let him spend whatever remains of his life understanding that ordering violence against people who threaten your power doesn't make you powerful. It makes you a murderer in a flag officer's uniform. Maya thought about Daniels bursting through the door of Zulu 3 with his weapon drawn, processing the impossible situation of finding his admiral unconscious and a junior officer claiming self-defense. He'd chosen to document what he saw rather than automatically assume the flag officer was the victim. That integrity had cost him his life. I want to speak at Daniels's memorial service. He deserves to be remembered as someone who chose accountability over blind loyalty to rank. His family deserves to know he died protecting the values this uniform is supposed to represent. Trent nodded. I'll coordinate with his family. But Maya, you should know that speaking at his memorial means publicly acknowledging the connection between his death and your testimony. It makes you a target for people who still believe Holloway was innocent and you destroyed a good man's career. I've been a target for 6 months. Death threats don't stop me from honoring someone who had the courage to tell the truth when lying would have been easier and safer. 3 days later, Maya stood before 200 uniformed personnel at Master Chief Barrett Daniels's memorial service, looking at photographs of a career that had spanned continents and conflicts, and ended in a parking garage, because accountability threatened powerful people who believed violence was an acceptable response to truth. She spoke without notes, her voice carrying across the assembly with the particular authority that came from surviving exactly the kind of institutional betrayal that had killed Daniels. Master Chief Daniels died because he refused to lie about what he witnessed in conference room Zulu 3. He could have claimed I attacked Admiral Holloway without provocation. He could have supported the narrative that a decorated flag officer was the victim of a vindictive junior officer. Instead, he documented what he saw and testified truthfully about a situation that contradicted everything his training had taught him about the chain of command. That integrity cost him his life. But it also proved that some people still believe honor means telling the truth regardless of personal cost. She paused, making eye contact with Daniels's widow in the front row. Master Chief Daniels served for 24 years protecting people in combat zones where the enemy was obvious and the mission was clear. He died protecting something more important. The principle that accountability applies to everyone, regardless of rank. His death wasn't meaningless. It exposed officers who were willing to murder witnesses to protect their power, and it ensured that every future prosecution will carry his name as evidence that truth matters more than protecting institutional reputation. After the service, Daniels's widow approached Maya with eyes red from crying, but voice steady with determination. Lieutenant Reeves, my husband told me what happened in that room. He said you were the bravest officer he'd ever seen.
because you walked into a trap knowing you might have to fight your way out. He believed what you did would change the Navy for every woman who comes after you. I wanted to thank you for giving his death meaning by continuing the fight he believed in." Maya embraced her, feeling the weight of that gratitude settle onto shoulders that had carried heavier burdens in worse places. "Your husband died protecting the values this institution is supposed to represent.
I promise you that his sacrifice will result in reforms that make sure no other officer has to face what he faced." 2 months after Daniels's memorial service, the Secretary of the Navy held a press conference announcing comprehensive reforms to military sexual assault reporting and prosecution procedures. New oversight mechanisms that bypassed chain of command, anonymous reporting systems monitored by civilian investigators, mandatory prosecution of senior officers accused of assault regardless of their rank or political connections. Maya watched the press conference from NCIS headquarters with Natalie, Trent, and Chen, seeing months of testimony and investigation compressed into policy changes that would affect hundreds of thousands of service members.
"This is what we fought for," Natalie said quietly. "Systematic change that makes reporting safe and prosecution possible."
It won't prevent all future assaults, but it removes the institutional protections that enabled predators like Holloway to operate for years. Chen pulled up statistics on her tablet. Reporting rates have increased 47% since Holloway's conviction. Prosecution rates are up 62%. And most importantly, conviction rates for senior officers accused of assault have gone from nearly 0 to 78%. The system is actually holding predators accountable now because victims believe their reports will be taken seriously. Trent stood, extending his hand to Maya. "Lieutenant Reeves, NCIS wants to offer you a permanent position with our Sexual Assault Investigation Division. You'd lead a team investigating institutional predators across all service branches. The work would be dangerous, politically complicated, and probably cost you whatever remains of your Navy career. But it would also mean continuing the mission you started in Zulu 3, hunting predators who believe their rank makes them untouchable." Maya thought about the 28-year-old intelligence officer who'd walked into conference room Zulu 3 6 months ago, believing she was documenting one assault. She'd triggered an investigation that had imprisoned a 2-star admiral, a 4-star admiral, and 8 other senior officers. She'd helped reform a system that had protected predators for decades. And she'd proven that some fights were worth having, even when victory cost everything you'd spent your life building. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow morning. Your first case involves a Marine Corps general accused of assaulting 3 female officers at Camp Pendleton. The investigation has stalled because senior officers are protecting him the same way they protected Holloway. We need someone with your operational background and your absolute refusal to accept that rank means immunity." Maya accepted the position, knowing it meant abandoning the traditional Navy career she'd imagined when she graduated from Annapolis. But traditional careers had never interested her as much as missions that mattered, and hunting institutional predators who preyed on the people they were sworn to protect mattered more than any promotion or assignment the Navy could offer. 3 months later, Maya led the team that arrested Marine Corps Major General Robert Hastings for sexual assault, abuse of authority, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The investigation revealed a pattern spanning 12 years and 17 victims, eerily similar to Holloway's hunting ground. Hastings was convicted and sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, and 3 colonels who'd protected him were court-martialed for conspiracy. 6 months after that, Maya's team exposed a sexual assault ring involving 7 Air Force officers at Nellis Air Force Base. The investigation revealed systematic predation enabled by senior officers who valued protecting their wing's reputation over protecting victims. All 7 were convicted. The wing commander was forced into retirement and lost his pension.
The cases continued. Navy, Marines, Air Force, Army. Maya's team identified and prosecuted 43 senior officers in 18 months, each case proving that the reforms triggered by Holloway's conviction were working. That victims could report without fear of retaliation. That evidence would be investigated rather than buried. That accountability applied regardless of rank or connections. On the 2-year anniversary of Holloway's conviction, Maya received promotion to lieutenant commander and assignment as the director of NCIS military sexual assault investigations. She stood in the same conference room where she'd first met Natalie Cross, looking at photographs of officers whose careers her team had ended because those officers had chosen to prey on subordinates instead of protecting them. Natalie entered wearing the silver eagles of a newly promoted captain, assigned to command a destroyer, the assignment she should have received 9 years ago if Kensington hadn't destroyed her career for reporting Holloway's assault.
Congratulations on the promotion, Commander Reeves. Though I suspect you'll be an admiral yourself within 10 years if you keep prosecuting predators at your current rate.
Maya laughed.
I don't want to be an admiral. I want to be the person who makes sure admirals understand that their stars don't exempt them from accountability. That seems more important than collecting rank myself. You've prosecuted 43 senior officers in 18 months. You've helped reform the entire military justice system.
You've given hundreds of victims the courage to report because you proved the system can actually deliver justice. Maya, you've done more to change military culture than most flag officers accomplish in entire careers.
We did it together. You filed the first complaint that documented Holloway's pattern. I just had the training and timing to finish what you started. But Natalie, the work isn't done. There are still officers who believe they can prey on subordinates and escape consequences. There are still victims too afraid to report because they've watched the system fail people before us. We've won battles, but the war for accountability continues as long as power creates opportunities for abuse.
Natalie pulled out a photograph, sliding it across the table. A young female ensign in dress whites, fresh from the academy, eyes bright with the naive hope that honor and duty meant something more than words people used to justify the unjustifiable. That's Ensign Rachel Morrison. She reported to her first assignment last week. Yesterday, she called me asking for advice about a senior officer who's making inappropriate comments and requesting private meetings in secured spaces. The pattern is already starting, Maya. Another predator. Another victim who'll have to choose between reporting and her career. Maya studied the photograph, seeing herself 2 years ago, young, idealistic, convinced the system would protect her if she just followed the rules and trusted the chain of command. She'd learned different lessons in Conference Room Zulu 3. Lessons about what justice required when the system valued protecting powerful predators over protecting vulnerable victims.
Give me her contact information. I'll reach out today. Make sure she knows that reporting doesn't have to mean career destruction anymore. That NCIS will investigate thoroughly and prosecute aggressively. That she's not alone and doesn't have to choose between justice and survival.
And if the investigation fails? If the senior officer has protectors willing to bury her complaint the way Kensington buried mine? Maya met her eyes with absolute conviction.
Then we expose those protectors too. Document their obstruction. Prosecute them for conspiracy. Make it clear that protecting predators is a crime that carries consequences equal to the original assault. We keep fighting until accountability becomes the default instead of the exception.
Agent Trent entered with news that would test that conviction immediately.
Commander Reeves, we just received a complaint from Ensign Jennifer Park at Naval Station Norfolk. She's accusing Rear Admiral Stephen Caldwell of sexual assault in circumstances that match Holloway's pattern exactly. Locked conference room, disabled surveillance, threats about career consequences if she reports.
The assault occurred 3 days ago, but she waited until she could contact us directly rather than reporting through her chain of command. Why the delay? Because Admiral Caldwell is the Deputy Commander of Atlantic Fleet. He has connections to the Secretary of the Navy and the Chief of Naval Operations. Ensign Park is 23 years old, 6 months out of the academy. She calculated that reporting through normal channels would result in her complaint being buried the way Commander Cross's was buried 9 years ago. So she contacted us directly and asked if the reforms you fought for actually protect junior officers or just look good in press releases. Maya felt the familiar calculations settling into her mind. Tactical assessment of operational parameters that would determine whether Ensign Park received justice or became another casualty of a system that still protected powerful predators more effectively than vulnerable victims. Contact Ensign Park. Tell her we'll investigate with the same thoroughness we applied to Holloway. Tell her that reporting doesn't mean career destruction. It means we'll document everything and prosecute aggressively regardless of Admiral Caldwell's rank or connections. And tell her that she's not alone. That every officer who's faced what she's facing is watching to make sure the system delivers justice instead of protecting another predator. Trent nodded, already coordinating the investigation that would either prove the reforms worked or expose institutional failures that still enabled senior officers to prey on subordinates with impunity. Maya turned back to Natalie, seeing her own determination reflected in eyes that had survived 9 years of exile and institutional betrayal, and were still willing to fight. This is what we do now. Every victim who reports, every predator we prosecute, every officer who tries to protect their power by destroying the people brave enough to demand accountability. We keep fighting until the system actually delivers on its promise that honor means something more than rank and politics. Natalie stood, extending her hand.
Then let's fight. For Ensign Park. For Rachel Morrison. For every woman who'll serve in this uniform after us and won't have to choose between justice and survival because we refused to accept that institutional reputation mattered more than individual lives.
They shook hands, passing responsibility from one generation to another the way military tradition demanded, even when that tradition was being fundamentally transformed by officers who refused to accept that accountability was optional for people with sufficient rank and connections. Maya walked out of NCIS headquarters as the sun set over San Diego Harbor, turning the Pacific into gold and red, like promises and warnings. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ensign Jennifer Park.
Commander Reeves, thank you for believing me.
Thank you for fighting when no one else would. Thank you for proving that some officers still believe honor means protecting victims instead of predators. Maya typed a response.
Ensign Park, you survived assault by reporting it instead of staying silent. That took more courage than most officers demonstrate in entire careers. We'll make sure your courage results in justice instead of retaliation. The fight continues, but we fight it together.
She hit send and kept walking, knowing that tomorrow would bring another case, another victim, another predator who believed rank meant immunity. But Maya Reeves had learned in Conference Room Zulu 3 that justice wasn't a destination. It was a fight she chose every day, regardless of personal cost or career implications. Admiral Holloway was serving 22 years in federal prison, learning that predators eventually encounter prey who refuse to be victims. Admiral Whitfield was facing life imprisonment for ordering the murder of a witness who threatened his power. 43 senior officers had been prosecuted and convicted because Maya and her team refused to accept that institutional reputation mattered more than individual accountability. The system wasn't perfect. Predators would always exist. But reforms meant victims could report with confidence that their complaints would be investigated rather than buried, that evidence would be documented rather than destroyed, That accountability applied to everyone, regardless of how many stars decorated their collar. Maya had walked into conference room Zulu 3 2 years ago, believing she was documenting one assault. She'd triggered a revolution that transformed military justice and proved that some fights were worth having, even when victory cost everything you'd spent your life building. The war for accountability would continue, as long as power created opportunities for abuse. But tonight, watching sunset paint promises across the Pacific, Maya Reeves understood that she'd chosen the right fight for the right reasons. And that made every sacrifice, every threat, every cost, absolutely worth it. Because justice wasn't about protecting institutions. It was about protecting the people those institutions were supposed to serve. And no rank, no connection, no amount of political power would ever change that fundamental truth, as long as officers like Maya Reeves refused to accept that silence protected anyone except the predators who deserved to be hunted, prosecuted, and imprisoned for betraying everything the uniform was supposed to represent.